Welcome to The Life of Try, the show where we explore what happens when we choose courage over comfort and take a real shot at the thing we've been thinking about for years. I'm Wynne Leon, and in this episode, I'm talking with Dr. Victoria Atkinson about a huge creative leap, writing and finishing a novel. Her new book, Slivers, is now in production and available for pre-order. And it's the kind of story that pulls you in fast. One summer week in 1973, a quiet neighborhood, generations of secrets, and an otherworldly presence that refuses to stay hidden. Together, we unpack what gets someone to start, what gets them to the finish line, and how community, craft, and even unexpected family history can fuel the work. If you've ever said, someday I'm going to write the book, this conversation is for you. This is The Life of Try. Hi, Vicki.
Hi, Wynne.
It is so good to talk with you. And I'm so exciting. It's such an exciting moment because your novel, Slivers, is in production and available for pre-order. Yay!
I know, it's
good.
insane. And like, ta-da.
Ooh, look at that. I mean, that is years.
Right?
So
Yes.
I want to talk to you about how and why you tried writing a novel. But first, a little bit about the book. The blurb is, in a single week in the summer of 1973, a quiet suburban neighborhood implodes when generations of mystical deceit become too much to bear. Drawn to the web of secrets and lies, the otherworldly Slivers refuse to be ignored, pushing one family to the brink. I mean, there's so much to love. The backdrop of the 70s, but secrets and mystical deceit. It's so good.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I heard a statistic. Roughly 80% of people say that they want to write a book. About 15% begin. Only 3% finish. I know, this is amazing.
Crazy.
Fewer than 1% publish. And so, congratulations on publishing your second book.
Thank you.
It's like you've won the Olympics of trying. I mean, what I want to know with that long-winded introduction is what got you to start and what got you to the finish line?
Oh, gosh. Well, I mean, first, thanks so much for, giving me the time to chat about this because you have been by my side, for like 2.5 years when this glimmer of an idea surfaced.
Right.
I think you and I share this drive, to kind of push ourselves, sometimes publicly, sometimes privately, to see if we can. And it's, I love your concept about life of try because I think it's definitely how you live your life and the things that you have accomplished are just truly amazing. But I think, for me, I had a lot of loss. My dad died when he was 61. Readers and followers know that my life with my mom, Sue, was anything but, blissful. There were challenges galore. But also life just serves up a lot of like unpleasantry. And so I think for a long time, I've just been wired for gratitude. And if you have the capability, you need to worry less about ability. You need to push yourself to try and see what you can do. And I think sometimes about my sister with all of her disabilities, I kind of won the lottery. I have, the capacity, maybe, I don't know, mentally or from a potential point of view, to push myself to try. So I think I'm a word person. I'm not a number person. I'm not an adventure person, but words are my friends. That's how I made a career, in the helping professions. But I think it's also the embodiment for me of the the crux of the Mary Oliver, quote, about the one wild and precious
Right.
life. And then in my head, I also think about my dad's words often. And you and I love our dad, connections. My dad would often say, make haste, try,
Right.
just try,
Right.
because time will pass. And I would hate to be one of those people in the stats, that you just referenced who wondered,
Yeah.
if they had it within but never tested themselves to try.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And what I love about your answer is, you're saying if you have the capacity to try, that there's not really an obligation, but sort of a responsibility to step up.
Yeah.
And it's also another way to make sense of your story. I mean, you
Mhm.
talked a little bit about that just in your answer,
Mhm.
difficult mother. Your dad died, the losses of life. And one of the things that I loved as you went through this process writing the book is that in the middle, you found some really interesting family history that you could weave in. But for me, that was so interesting on a couple levels. First, that trying got you
Mhm.
to discovering this information that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Right.
And, a lot of people who are interested in their family history and genealogy don't really know what to do with it to make it interesting to others or preserve it for the long run. And this is a fascinating way to preserve it for the long run and by weaving it in. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
can you say more about how you researched your family history?
Yeah, so it the way this sort of evolved, you and I have talked about this too, that after I wrote Surviving Sue, there was a lot of feedback. I was surprised from readers who wanted to know about those references early on in the book to my mom's kind of unspokens and those, conversations that she had with her siblings, that I think, the seeds of doom in my relationship with my mother,
Yeah.
were sown early on because I wasn't supposed to tune into that. And so in Surviving Sue, I wrote about that, a little bit. I was careful because I didn't want to scare people to think that I was completely off my rocker, maybe just a touch, right?
Right, right.
But I think that made it harder for my mom to navigate around me and the kind of orchestrated lies that she told. So when I started playing with this idea of, gosh, what would it be like to build on that and write a story about a highly intuitive family, fictionalized, but, inspired by some things that I experienced, I started writing. And you were amazing, my friend Kathleen and Linda, kind of reading as I wrote. But what I wasn't expecting is I got partway through it and I began remembering that my mom, had some. One great aunt in particular from Scotland who was a little, that they referred to her as being touched.
Yeah.
And in Slivers, I say in the author's notes at the end when I share a little bit more about some of these ancestral connections, saying someone is touched is not a compliment, right? That is not good
Not
news,
it's
right?
not touched by the spirit in the Holy Spirit kind of way.
No, no, she was very much maligned, but she
Mm.
had these like ways of knowing, right? And so I was like, oh, just for fun, I'm going to poke around a little bit in, ancestry.com. I knew that, on my dad's side and my mom's too, that there was a little, kind of sordid history, and I'd put that aside. Holy moly guacamole, I had no idea what I was going to find about my mom's family, and it was right there, and I was like, oh, oh, oh. So it was a little bit like jet fuel.
Mhm.
Like, okay,
Mhm.
so I'm gonna write this story, this fiction. Now all of a sudden there's a hair of like auto fiction, woven in, but it kept me moving to keep telling this
Mhm.
story and to maybe be a little bit bold about,
Right.
what happens to this family and the deceit and the lies and all of that, because I could say that it was fiction, but in the back of my mind, I did enough research to know that there was some sordid, sort of history there
Right.
that was real and true. So I think
Mhm.
in a lot of ways it grounded me and kept me moving.
Interesting. And interesting that, that piece of auto fiction and also how our families' histories really do come to play in our lives in a way, you know, that isn't, it's sort of mystical, but
Yeah.
it's real. It's a real
Yeah.
impact.
And
Hmm.
I wished, that my mom was still here.
Yeah.
I wish that great Aunt Susan was still around because I've got a million questions. And I
Right.
also think, because the ability to dig deep and look at ancestral stuff going back hundreds and hundreds of years is literally at our fingertips today, where,
Absolutely.
my parents' generation, and before, it was you relied on a storyteller
Yeah.
or paper documents, or history was just forgotten,
Yeah.
sometimes on purpose, right?
Right, right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned that readers' questions from Surviving Sue were part of the impetus in writing a novel.
Yeah.
Can you say more about how the two books are connected?
Yeah, I think there's an Easter egg for readers of Surviving Sue. So there's a color gray green that's prominently featured in Surviving Sue, and if you look at the cover of Slivers,
Hmm.
there's a little homage there to kind of a spooky looking house that
Right,
is also kind of gray green.
right. So it's
Um,
a different version of the file cabinet.
yes, exactly. You nailed it.
Hmm.
So I think for me, it was really an interesting thing when people ask me questions about this, the unspokens, the knowingness, the highly intuitive stuff. I had a lot of questions from readers about, did that help me as a professional, but also as Sue's daughter, to find ways to give her grace. When people have read Surviving Sue, I have often heard, how can you look back, on all the things that she did and said and all the dysfunction, and still hold some affection for her? Well, you and I have talked about this. That was my work to do. That was not, Sue's burden to bear. And
Right.
though my story is my story, it's not unique. People go through lots of things. But
Hmm.
when readers asked about that and where empathy comes from,
Hmm.
it opened up a whole conversation, that I started exploring with myself about where do seeds of empathy form.
Hmm.
And for me, very often it was looking at that disparity between what people say and what they do, what their
Hmm.
words are, but what the affect is. And I realized that's a skill that, um, to greater or lesser, success, that I've honed over my life. And
Hmm.
I have to carefully manage that because people do wear their masks.
Hmm. Hmm.
And being able to see beyond that. So I
Yeah.
think the connection between the two is really that encouragement for me from a self-discovery point of view to do some exploring to see if, am I the only one? Was it just me and my
Hmm.
mom and her
Hmm.
sisters? But what would it be like to write a story about a family that carries that weight,
Hmm.
and what that struggle is like?
Right.
How does it affect all of them when they're trying to shed it?
Yeah. And how the generations, it gets amplified, distorted, mutated as the, you know, previous generations' decisions get passed down.
Yeah.
In so many ways, you really illustrate that weight well as the how do we shed it? How do we change it? How do we,
Yeah.
it's exploring those really interesting life
Yeah.
questions, right?
Well, and you and I both know that, we're always intrigued by kind of this idea of the weight of lies. The
Mm-hmm.
things that we
True.
do to try and get through our days, the half
Mm-hmm.
truths that we tell ourselves, the things
Yeah.
that we perpetuate,
Mm-hmm.
in a self-serving way. But you said that so well. What happens when you do that generationally
Mm-hmm.
and you begin to like recast, your family, your lineage?
Yeah. 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 Well, you've said this is the hardest thing you've ever done. Oh. And which is saying something. I mean, you've defended a doctoral dissertation, so
Yeah.
that is saying something. So here I'm hoping that you'll give us some concrete tips and pointers for trying. What got you through? What made it so that you didn't go, "Wow, this is super hard. I'm I'm not doing it."
there were moments.
Yeah.
Yeah, there
Yeah.
were moments. I think I have you in my
Mhm.
corner. I have, really great reader writer friends. I'm
Mhm.
part of a great, writers group
Right.
also, and I've received a lot of feedback along the way because I was curious about whether or not I could write fiction
Mhm.
because writing a textbook,
Mhm.
it's a pretty straight line.
Right.
Writing a
Mhm.
memoir, I could, zig and zag and, kind of meander a little. Writing fiction, if you do it in a straight line, you're like, what is that? That is,
Yeah.
that is not interesting. So I think I got some feedback early on as I was doing, attempting fiction because I wondered whether or not it was something that I could do. I had to learn how to write differently. And when you're a mental health person, it's noun and verb. It's the action. There are no
Right.
adjectives.
Right.
We don't like those, right? Don't characterize. Talk about what happened factually. But writing and telling a story and trying to build characters, you have to bring all, of that goodness forward to do that little bit of world building, with
Mhm.
people. And so I think I was a very lucky person to have people reading as I wrote that said that there was potential in what I was doing. And I had some wonderful people to say that were willing to say, you can't do it like you would write other things. This needs to be a different part of Vicky's writer head, and
Mhm.
I believe you have it.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, let her come through. And, there were
Right.
moments because I said this to you. I don't, people are being nice to me. I don't believe that I have the capacity, right? They're
Right.
just being nice. And yet, that creative storytelling stuff would like light my fire because I grew to love the characters and I would sit back and go, oh, yeah, this is what happens between the two of them and began to paper the walls in my office with all of these ideas. So
Yeah.
there was a lot of good energy too. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
It does. It does.
Yeah.
Community.
Yeah.
Um, Surrounding yourself with people who can lift you up when you
Yeah.
reach that bottom. Exercising a different type of the brain and knowing that you're doing it.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
then just sort of leaning into the fun of it. It sounds like, yeah.
Yes. And
So,
also, having a publisher, my friends at Eckhart's Press, when I said, hey, I think I want to do this, they were like, Dr. Vicky, who wrote about, her complicated life with her mom and, has this academic background. I think people willing to support you when you're taking a risk,
hmm hmm
right? Because I think that's one of the huge considerations for a lot of writers, those that you spoke about in the statistics. It's like, but it's really hard to write and not think about the finished product. But I
hmm
want to know that if I'm going to invest this time,
right.
it will exist in some form. And so,
Yeah.
I had some advantages in that way.
Yeah. Right. So, my 6-year-old son, Mr. D, came home from first grade a couple weeks ago with, he had some chants about book writing. Hook your reader. That's a hook.
Where did this come from? It was
From
something in like
first
his
grade.
reading group?
I know.
Like,
His teacher is very good with chants, and he comes home and tells me them.
I love that. I thought you were
Yeah.
going to say it was something baseball related, right? Because
No,
I could be
no.
like,
Well, that's also true. But it's funny that we start young with
mm,
our writing skills, and they can carry us through our whole lives with the storytelling and making meaning in our lives,
yeah.
fueling our efforts to try. So tell us what's next on your creative radar.
Mm. I did this thing at the end of Slivers where I did a time jump and I wrote an epilogue and I
Mm,
decided to take it out, which was a really hard thing, as
yes.
you know, because I think I am wired for feedback. And even though my book is not going to be on Amazon, right away, I'm looking forward so much to reader input because Slivers wouldn't exist in its completed form, all the incarnations, along the way if I hadn't received feedback from surviving Sue. So I think, I'm curious about the epilogue because in my heart, I don't want to be done with these characters
Yeah.
because I have ideas about what happens next to them. But I think I need to wait and see. There's a part of me that's like, oh, write this story about loving Lisa. My sister that, readers and, blogging friends are so dear about, because her story is wonderful. So I have folks that are like, you ought to be writing about that,
Mm.
and tapping my mental health kind of head. But I'm curious
Yeah.
about the feedback that
Yeah.
I'll get to see what comes next. So I don't know. Do you have like, prediction skills? Can you
I do
tell
not.
me?
That
No.
is that is
Hmm.
on my list of things that I tried.
Hmm.
Predicting. I
Hmm.
have tried that before. It's turned out poorly. So
Darn it.
it is not
Yeah.
my one of my strengths. But I love sort of that full circle approach that you're talking about, where a try results in you know a book, a project, an effort, and then you get that feedback, and that informs your next try. It's pretty
And I think
special.
it's that way you said it early on about, having community around you and
Mhm.
finding support where you
Right.
can. And I think I've been so lucky in that way that people are interested and willing to read, my little
Hmm.
ghost story. It's hard for me to explain
Yeah.
what it is, but having the time to talk with you about it, hopefully I'm stringing the nuggets together so it sounds
Right.
sort of appealing and worth people's
It
reading
is.
time.
It is appealing. You have hooked your reader. I tell you
Oh,
that.
thank you, Mr. D, right? Yeah,
Right.
I
Right.
like it. I like
Right.
it. Oh my
Yes.
gosh.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about Slivers. I will put the link in the show notes to
Thank you.
order it on Eckhart's Press. It's in production. It's in pre-order mode. It's in production. So really, it's worth doing an
Thank
incredible
you
result.
so much. And I have a launch party coming up in a few weeks that I wish I could virtually invite,
Hmm.
the whole universe to, but I promise I'll post lots of pictures about that because it'll be in one of my favorite semi-spooky houses, that I
Okay.
love, an old mansion. So
Well,
I
and
wish everyone could be there. Yeah.
yes, I love that little nugget that you told me before we started recording, which is when you write a ghost story, everybody tells you their ghost stories.
It is, yeah. And I think ghost stories, no matter who you are, everyone has some
Hmm.
connection, to
Hmm.
something, whether you believe or have experienced or not, everyone knows someone who has a
Yeah.
bucket of that was unexplainable,
Right.
right?
Right. Right. That was
Yeah.
unexplainable.
Oh my
Well,
gosh. But
well
thank
said.
you so much for the time. Always good to visit with you.
So good to talk to you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Our music was written for us by the incredible duo of Jack Campora and Rob Koenig. For show notes and more great inspiration, see avitiva.com. AVITIVA.com.